Hello, good afternoon, welcome. This is the Cloud Security Alliance UK chapter. Today we are presenting the first of a series of talks on identity in the cloud. So this is the first talk. So a little bit about us. So the Cloud Security Alliance, we are the UK chapter of the Cloud Security Alliance, which is a global non-for-profit organisation with the mission to promote the best practices of providing security assurance within cloud computing, and also to provide education on the uses of cloud computing to help secure all other forms of computing. To summarize, we're here to champion Cloud Security Alliance mission in the UK. We do have an active UK membership, and we engage with a broad set of UK stakeholders. We champion cloud training, and we also champion education and awareness of cloud security in the UK. We do survey the needs of the UK members, and this is how this series has come about. So we asked our members recently what you'd like to see from the UK chapter this year. So we were told that you wanted to see more webinars, and specifically you wanted to first see us talk more about the topics of identity and access management. So this is what this series is about. It's focusing on identity in the cloud, also looking at the impact on zero trust as well. We're really keen to deliver programs to meet those needs. We also have a research program as well. So it's not just ourselves as volunteers. There's a set of volunteers on the board, but also we're looking for you to get really involved in what we're doing. For example, there is a research program, and this is the link if you want to find out a little bit more about that. Please get involved. So today, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, which is our very own Paul Simmons. Now, Paul is a long-standing member of the UK chapter, the Cloud Security Alliance. 1 second. Bear with me 1 second. Sorry, Paul. And so Paul is the actual CEO. Oh, you've got it on state on the screen as well. He's the CEO of the Global Identity Foundation, and he's formerly been the Chief Information Security Officer of AstraZeneca, and prior to that, the Global CISO of ICO and Global CISO with Motorola. And he was awarded the first Chief Security Officer of the Year, as well as the Best Security Implementation at the SC Magazine Awards. And he's twice listed as one of the network world's most powerful people in networking. He's the director of the Cloud Security Alliance Europe, and he co-founded the Jericho Forum on the advisory boards of a number of global tech companies. So we're really lucky to have Paul delivering these talks. So certainly part 1 and part 2, which will be next week, same time. So without further ado, I will hand over to Paul and let him talk. All right.
Thank you, Shireen.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I'm just going to pop back for 2 seconds. So this is a series of 6 talks. This is the first one, Understanding Identity Part 1. Understanding Identity Part 2, which will be next week. So please join us for all of these. We're going to try and keep them short, sweet, and to half an hour. This is why they're called lightning talks. Okay, so let's kick off. What actually is identity? Now, I'm not going to talk, hopefully, no technology in this first session. So this is a technology-free session. Certainly, we're not going to talk about product. Here's the philosophy. I am me. It's as simple as that. If ever you wonder about identity, just say, I am me. End of story. What does that actually mean? It's when you first see me, I'm this entity that you might know as Paul Simmons. You might not know as Paul Simmons. You might call me something else. Doesn't really matter. But when you first see me, I'm the same entity when we first met. I am still the same entity today, and if we meet in a few years' time, guess what? I will be the same entity tomorrow. I don't change. Yeah, I am me and always will be. And I'm going to introduce you to your first identity term. It's called sameness. Yeah, I am the same entity. Yes, when first met, today and tomorrow, and humans use faces to do sameness. So in real life, IRL, humans do sameness. And, it doesn't matter. We don't have to be introduced. We can see the same person on the platform queuing for the train into London every morning. Yeah. I might not know their name. I might not even ever be introduced to them, but I can do sameness because we as humans in real life use faces. As a unique entity, person in this case, I have multiple facets of my overall identity. And guess what? They're all maintained personally by myself, either as an attribute or as a pointer. So what do I mean by that? So, some facets of my identity I'm reasonably happy to share. My family relationships, obviously all my family and my extended family know me and have known me since I was born, and know the relationships between aunts, uncles, brothers, mothers, fathers, and everything else. And that's probably the same for most people. There's a bunch of my attributes, facets of my identity that actually are pointers. They're parts of my identity that are controlled by others. My passport, for example, is issued by UK Passport Authority. It contains a bunch of attributes, but it's owned and controlled and issued by UK Passport Authority. Same with my driving license, and actually the same with my birth certificate. And then finally, there's some I might never choose to share. Facets of my identity, sexual persuasion, for example. You might be happy to share your sexual persuasion if you're in San Francisco, probably not so much if you are in Iraq, for example. Tribe or ethnicity is the other one. I was talking to a guy who was actually in the era of Saddam Hussein, was in Iraq, and he was an ethnic Kurd. And he said, if I get stopped at a traffic stop, I do not admit I am an ethnic Kurd, because it would just get me thrown straight into jail or beaten up, because the police are the opposite tribe. So some parts of the world, again, it's a risk assessment, isn't it? We as people group facets, or in the identity world, we call them attributes of our overall identity, into what we call personas. Yeah, they're groups of related attributes that define us in a particular context. And that's really important as we get on later in these sessions to talking about how we do this in IT. But for the moment, let's just concentrate on people. So I am me. Yeah. And I have a family persona. I have a citizen persona. I have an employment persona. I have a sporting persona, I have a driving persona, and I have a tax persona, or maybe personas if you work in multiple countries. So we have all these personas. And actually, if you think about it, you and I probably have hundreds of thousands of personas. Some we share, some we don't. Some might be highly personal, some are very public. But they all define us into a particular context, and context is key. We're going to talk about that next week. So here's a couple of my personas. This is my security professional persona. As you can see, this was Las Vegas, presenting the keynote at Black Hat. My security professional persona, it's fairly public. You can Google me, and you will find lots of interesting things. Some of which are more true than others, believe it or not. What I'm happy to share with you, this is my sporting persona. I'm a whitewater kayak instructor. Yeah, so that's another one of my personas. And actually, outside of my friends, and now you, of course, the two never need to meet. The two are totally segregated. The two totally separate lives, if you like, or two totally separate personas. There is no overlap between attributes in each of those personas. And when I'm out and about, I can delve into those personas to produce attributes as I require them. And obviously, I am making, every time I delve in and present you with an attribute, I am making a risk-based calculation about whether it's safe or appropriate to share them. So here's me. And if I get stopped for speeding, guess what? The policeman says, "Can I see your driver's license?" And I make a risk-based calculation about whether it's safe and appropriate to share it. And the answer is, if I don't want to get it shoved in jail, probably, or arrested, then probably I'm happy to share my driving license with the policeman that stopped me. And so, I am allowed to drive this. And yes, I will produce some insurance documentation. If I get asked to take a child kayaking, and they want to trust little Johnny with me, then I'm going to present them a different set of attributes. In this case, my British canoeing coaching qualifications and my current membership of the British Canoeing to show I'm properly insured, and a whole bunch of other attributes. And again, there is no overlap between the two of them. And ultimately, if we are going to interact with other people or other entities, then in real life, faces are key. So that phrases pertaining to this interaction, so that we can do authentication, are embedded in our everyday language. So, have you seen Fred? I'll see you next year. It's nice to finally see you. That was a phrase we used a lot after the pandemic. Especially, it's nice to finally see you in the flesh. Was obviously a phrase that we used an awful lot after 2 years of Zoom calls and everything else. And oh, I'm sure I saw Julie. So I saw a person in the distance. I looked at the person and thought, yeah, that's Julie. I remember I met her 5 years ago. I'm sure I saw Julie. It's embedded into our everyday conversation because authentication for humans are done with faces. And that causes us a real problem when we start trying to do it over the internet or over technology. But again, that's not for today. When we see someone, and I said, we don't need to know them, we assign attributes they share. If they're standing on the platform at Gerrard's Cross, waiting for the 7:05, then probably they're going into work, which means they've got a job. They, we know that rough height, they're wearing a dress. And therefore I'm making an assumption that they are female, not necessarily an assumption, but it's an internalized, and I internalize that as a unique identifier of that face. And because I see them every morning, I store it up in my store, if you like, of identifiers with a bunch of attributes. Some I may know, some I may assume based on what I am seeing. And the key thing to remember here is that authentication, by whatever method and however tenuous, is the key to sameness. In other words, we authenticate to derive sameness, the same person or the same entity that we saw before. And that goes for computing as well. So when you are logging in with the username, actually, we don't care about the username or the user or anything else. That unique user ID is a key to sameness, which has some authentication behind it. But again, part 2 next week. So this is why your driving license or your passport has your face on it. It links the person to the attributes contained with some degree of confidence. And we call that degree of confidence in the identity world as immutable linkage or immutable binding, or the level of immutable linkage, because nothing is ever 100%. So, and hence the problem starts. So when we cannot interact face to face and therefore conduct a face-to-face risk assessment of the likelihood of a match, we then start running into all sorts of problems and getting into all sorts of horrible technology solutions to try and up the chances that they actually are who they say they are. In other words, our level of immutable binding. And as people, over thousands of years, we've derived this model for how identity works in real life. And the problem IT faces, and again, we're going to go into this in the next few sessions, is that we can do this for people. But we are fixated on how to extrapolate people into this wider non-face-to-face world, and we end up with some real horrible kludges in IT to try and make that happen. And this flaw in the world of computing is our Achilles heel. So I'm going to introduce you to this thing we called an identity triangle, and I'm going to share the first three parts of it today. What normal humans call identity actually consists of three distinct components. We have the authentication phase. How do I uniquely prove that I am the same person you previously met? We then have the I am me, the sameness part that contains personas and attributes, and then actually the attributes themselves, the parts of the overall identity that we actually go out and share. And as I said, what we call identity is actually these three distinct components, and we bunch them together and just call them, well, it's identity, isn't it? At our peril, especially in the IT world. So here's your definition. What is an identity? The source reference is down there if you want to go and look it afterwards. A collection of attributes about an entity. We'll talk about entities later, grouped together in personas which are linked together by sameness, all with an understood and communicable level of immutable linkage between entity and its sameness. So, how are we doing? Not too bad. History. So, we started with mainframes. They were godlike back in the 60s. They were implicitly trusted. And if you were lucky enough, you were granted the privilege to be able to interact. And ever since then, we have been fixated as IT people on the binary authentication of a user account. And sort of that worked well until about the early 90s, early 2000s. And ever since we started using networks, it has failed. And now we're using cloud and zero trust. Boy, is it failing big time. And again, we're going to go on to that in a few weeks. And if you're an American listening to this, then actually, if you're using the NIST standards, NIST still get this wrong, in my humble opinion. Yeah, they insist on defining human entities and non-human entities. Get real, guys. We are just entities. They confuse identity with persona, which they don't define. And it goes wrong all over the place. So I apologize to any Americans on this call. NIST have got it wrong. So I get people, because we all do people, because we're people. But what are entities? Well, this is how we started off as the Jericho Forum, defining entities. People, devices, organizations, code, and agents. And actually, it's more than that. It's a unique thing. If you chunk that up, the definition is a unique thing with a distinct and independent existence. So there we are. We had big debate. Is an aircraft an entity? And the answer is yes, because every single component in that aircraft is actually got a serial number on it, as does the airframe. So yes, one 747 from another 747 is unique and distinct. Why are entities so important? Because entities enable personas. Let me go into this a little bit more. If you generalize how my persona works, a human persona, and the attributes, then it is actually the join of two entities that form a unique persona, populated hopefully with some authoritative attributes. They don't need to be authoritative. They might not be in the case of family, but in the case of my canoeing persona, yes, the join between entity me and entity British Canoeing organization gives me a bunch of unique attributes that describe me in context of that persona. My British Canoeing number, the fact that I'm a level 3 coach, the fact that I have a current first aid certificate, the fact that I have a DBS to work with young people, etc., etc., etc. So let's think about this. What are a few examples? Me and UK government creates my citizen persona, in other words, my birth certificate. The join between me and entity Simmons family creates my family persona. Entity me and the UK DVLA contains my driving license persona or my driving persona. Acme PLC, if I'm working for Acme PLC, creates my Acme PLC staff persona, some of which will be more authoritative and more portable, shareable, in other words, than others. So for the example of my driver's license or my passport, I get a piece of card or a booklet or whatever, which I can present, which has a pretty picture on it saying driving license and some holograms and some other bits and pieces to say, yeah, this is a genuine DVLA issued driver's license with a whole bunch of stuff that has my photo and my driver's license number and everything else on it. And let's look at a KYC check, and know your customer check. For those of you who are in banking, it relies on face-to-face. If you've done a KYC check recently, you will know that actually what needs to happen. You go into a financial institution for your KYC check. They insist on original documents from mainly authoritative entities, and one of which at least must be photographic. In other words, it has a photo on it. And what are they doing? They are tying the name on the paperwork that you present with your face on your driver's license. So my face ties me to the name Paul Simmons. Paul Simmons ties me to the fact that I'm presenting whatever I'm presenting in terms of the KYC check. So they look at my face and say, yeah, we have an acceptable level of immutable linkage between photo and my name. And therefore, all the extra attributes that I'm asserting using the name Paul Simmons actually make a linked set of assertions because they all have the same name on them. So that is what's actually going on in the background. Why are entities important? Number two, because over a network, you can't easily distinguish a person from any other entity type. It's the Turing test, isn't it? Or in this case, the Bender test. In reality, you don't know, binary one, whether it's a person, an AI, an IoT device, a system, a hacker at the end of the conversation. Yeah, just because the password or certificate matches, or even the API says biometric match, it does not make it 100% the entity claim. And the problem is, as IT people, we rather like binary one, but it never actually is in the identity world. My brother probably looks enough like me that actually, if I lent him my passport and no one had seen him before, actually the photo would be a close enough match that actually he could probably pass himself as being me. And of course, you know, if you're a 17-year-old girl and you want to go into a nightclub, what you do is you borrow your 18-year-old sister's ID if you look enough alike. You know, standard rite of passage. So when communicating remotely, what should we care about? And what should we care about is the fidelity of the entity's assertion of who they claim to be. Are they who they say they are? But more importantly, the level of immutability. How well is the wetware, me, connected to the firmware that I'm using to communicate with you? So we can make it work really well when it's face-to-face, but it gets increasingly difficult the more removed with technology the person is from the transaction. So ultimately, why are personas important? Personas are really key to anonymous yet authoritative attributes. So we can have anonymity at the root, and this is a whole separate day's worth of explanation of why you can make anonymous work. But ultimately, all you need to prove is that I am me and I actually own these attributes that I'm asserting. So the join between me and Organisation UK Government gives me my citizen persona. And if we make this work correctly, then actually I can assert those as being my attributes with a high degree of anonymity and privacy. And going forward, that is going to be really, really important. So in this case, it's, place of birth, sex at birth, name at birth, citizenship, when it was issued, lease times, where I go for revalidation, lots of other bits and pieces that actually we can create using this model. So with about 3 minutes to go, in conclusion, what are the takeaway points? An identity, the I am me bit of it, consists of many attributes. We split these into logical groups, personas, facets of the overall entity. If we segment into personas, we provide a level of privacy and potentially control. There is no need for you to know or see my date of birth if all I'm trying to do is give you my driver's license to prove that I'm over 18. But I do at the moment. Not good. Where attributes are issued by an authoritative source, passport, driver's license, etc., then providing them signed by that authoritative source allows the entity to assert more than one signed attribute. So in other words, if I present you with my passport, I can therefore give you and prove my date of birth because it's signed by effectively UK government. By authenticating personas, we can add a level of confidence in those attributes to the person receiving them. Yes, that passport might be fake, that driver's license might be fake, but actually we can look at the holographic identity. We can actually, if we were border entry, they can check whether it's on the stolen list. They can check whether it's still valid in real time as you go through passport control. Interestingly enough, I can't go through the biometric gates because there is another Paul Simmons who's on their watch list. Not me, I hasten to add, but actually it means that my passport is, or my name, Paul Simmons, is flagged for a manual check that my face matches my passport, which actually doesn't give me much confidence in the level set on the biometric gates. But there we are. That's again a whole different talk. By understanding the level of immutability between me, the entity, and the assertion I am making, in this case, photo, we can provide a level of confidence that the person providing the assertion, that date of birth, is actually the person holding the credential. And while this has little to do with IT, understanding it properly will allow us, and this is what we're going to get onto in the next couple of presentations, will allow us to design better and more secure IT systems. So with a minute to go, if you want a sort of written transcript of these, there are two blogs here, part 1 and part 2, which sort of explain what I've been presenting here today. Obviously, a lot of this work comes from Jericho, the Open Group, obviously the Global Identity Foundation, and also the CSA itself. What's coming up? Obviously, you can go and register for the next one next week. If you enjoyed this week, I hope you did. Join me next week for part 2, which we're going to talk about how we extend some of those concepts into context and trust. So how can we trust it, particularly in IT systems? We'll start talking about IT. Then we got identity challenges, extending that identity into the cloud, leveraging that identity for zero trust. And then hopefully we're going to have a panel session on the 17th of October, future challenges, pitfalls with identity. So looking forward to it. And I look forward to seeing you all next week. If you've got friends who you think would be interested, obviously this is on YouTube, so you can go and watch it again or send them the link to watch it, sign up for next week. And I look forward to seeing as many of you as possible that can make it.
Brilliant. That's absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much, Paul. I think we're coming up to 1 p.m. now on the dot. So thank you so much for your time, and looking forward to part 2 next week, and then the following next 4 Tuesdays. So 5 Tuesdays in total, every Tuesday, 12:30. So looking forward to seeing you soon. Thanks very much.
You're welcome.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye, everyone.